Good evening. How's everyone doing?
Doing well.
We're good.
Very good.
Well, it's that time. Let me go ahead on and call the meeting, coronavirus ad hoc committee meeting to order. Mr. Brown, I think you had 3 items on the agenda.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
Let me entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. I think those 3 items was those A, B, and C items. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
You call a roll?
Thank you very much. Let me call the roll. I'm sorry about it here, but Ms. Only.
Yes, sir.
Let me call the roll for me. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
Ms.
sir. McBride,
I'm present, but I'm having problems with my connection, so I can lose you at any time.
okay. Livingston,
Present.
Walker,
He informed me that he'll be a little late.
okay. Myers,
Here.
Newton,
Here.
thank you.
Thank you. Now I entertain that motion for the adoption of the agenda.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Move, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Moving and proper second for adoption of the agenda. Anything need to be added, changed, Mr. Brown?
No, sir. I don't know if it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, but I don't think you all did the approval of the minutes if that's necessary.
That is, yes. But I'll come back to that. So the adoption of the agenda, can you call roll for adoption of, I'm sorry. Yes, call the roll, please.
Yes. McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
It
Let me go
passes.
back, and I apologize, I didn't have the hard copy agenda with me. Let me go back and adopt, ask for a motion to adopt the minutes.
I'll move to approve.
This is move for approval for adoption of the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Mr. Chair.
It's moved
Mr.
properly
Chair.
second. Any
Mr. Chair,
discussion, change?
Question, Mr. Chair, Bill
Mr.
Mallon.
Brown, you recognize.
Thank you. Your agenda has several different minutes. You approving all of them or?
Yes. All of them.
That's all I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Newton, you recognize.
Yes, this is Chakisse Newton, and I just do have one question in our minutes, and I can't remember which agenda it was from. It talked about the coronavirus blue ribbon committee that we discussed forming. That is not on our agenda today, and I didn't know if we were going to get any updates on that item.
Not that I was worried, but I'll ask Mr. Brown that question, whether or not he plans to discuss that.
No, Mr. Chair, I did not have any plans to discuss a blue ribbon committee for the coronavirus update today.
Okay. Anything else reference the minutes?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Mallon, you recognize.
Thank you. Just one last thing, and that is all I received was the agenda via email. I don't have any of the actual documentation, so I would just like somebody to get that to me with the next package of stuff they send to me. Thank you.
Well,
Sir.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Myers, you recognize.
Thank you. Just can I ask, please, to follow up on Ms. Newton's question? We're, I guess, 5 months in now, and this is something that we raised, some time ago as an important item. I'd ask that for the next meeting, that the staff actually prepare something.
And what was that?
The blue ribbon style coronavirus ad hoc standing committee.
since Ms. Newton raised it, I just wanted to remind us that, you know, we've been asking about this for a good bit now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else regarding the minutes? If not, Ms. Owens, can you call roll for adoption of the minutes?
Yes, sir. McBride. Livingston,
Yes.
Myers,
Yes?
Newton.
Yes.
It passes.
Passes. Mr. Brown, that brings us to those items on the agenda.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. First item on the agenda was titled Coronavirus Relief Fund Requirements. So we're going to give you an update on what we have been made aware of related to the Coronavirus Relief Fund requirements that have been released to us by the state. And so if you could hold tight, if you have your computers, we're going to flip the screen. We're going to share with you some information. I'm going to have Mr. Pat Beekman guide you through this information, and then we'll have a discussion. What I would ask is so we can get through this information. As you hear information that you have questions about, please take down those questions. Let us get through the update, and then we'll certainly entertain all the questions that you may have as a member of the committee or as a member that's recognized by the chair during this discussion. So, Mr. Beekman, if you could go ahead for this first item and share.
Is that found on pages 30 to 42?
What was the question, Ms. Myers?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that information that's found on pages 30 to 42?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
You may go ahead.
My screen.
Yeah, we don't see your presentation just yet, Mr. Beekman. We just see the blank screen.
Okay, come up soon.
Okay, you're also having some audio. Okay.
Okay, can you guys see it yet?
Yes.
Okay, super. Okay, I'll give you an update on the coronavirus relief fund that we just.
You're cutting in and out on your audio, Mr. Beekman.
Administrator Brown, if Pat pulls up the PowerPoint, I can more than happy go through it.
Okay.
Since he's having audio issues.
I've got a storm coming through where I'm at right now is the challenge.
Okay.
Can you all see my screen now?
We can't see your screen, Mr. Beekman. Let's do this way. We unfortunately for Mr. Malinowski, he does not have the packet. Mr. Malinowski will get that back to you, sir. But Mr. Beekman, let's not let the audio and technical difficulties hold us up. Let's cover down on the information that was provided. So don't worry about sharing the screen. Let's just walk through the updated information for the committee.
Will do. Okay, there are 5 funding sources Richland County is receiving funding from through the CARES Act. Funding source through FEMA, which is a COVID-19 public assistance program. Through HUD, it's DBGCV. HHS, it's a provider relief fund, which direct payment was made to ES of a little over $350,000. And they're applying for additional funding through the provider relief fund for lost revenue as a result of ambulance services.
Right, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
You have a lot
Yeah,
of.
Ms. Myers, Ms. Newton, I'm sorry, who is?
I think Mr. Brown was about to address my concern. Unless it's the internet connection on my end, I'm having a lot of trouble hearing Mr. Beekman. I know that Mr. King had mentioned, well, I'll let Mr. Brown decide how he wants us to go through this, but it seems like Mr. Beekman was able to share slides for those people that wanted to see it, but the audio is not working.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is 2 things. If Mr. Beekman can share the screen, that's fine. And then we'll have Mr. King walk us through that information. So let's go with that approach.
Okay, can you now?
It's showing us that you're starting to share your screen, Mr. Beekman, but we still see all black right now.
That's a shame. I'm in the middle of a storm here. Our power keeps going on and off. Here, can you?
Okay, so what we're going to do is appreciate that, Mr. Beekman. What we'll do is if you will hold on the call, and what we'll do is we'll cover the information presented in the packet, and we'll have some discussions. But just stay on the line, please. Mr. King.
Mr. Brown,
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize for interrupting again. Just for what it's worth, I'm not sure if he can access it, but Mr. Malinowski, I just emailed you the packet for this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Brown, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newton.
All right, Mr. King, can you see that CARES Act funding breakdown, sir?
Yeah, I can
Yes,
see that now.
yes, sir, I can.
Okay, if you would pick up the discussion, please.
Yes, sir. To make a very brief update is right now we're working with 5 different funding channels under the CARES Act, potential funding opportunities for Richland County. The first is FEMA, which is the Public Assistance Program. Pat, we just lost it again. If you get it back up, the PowerPoint. The first is a COVID-19 Public Assistance Program. Public assistance is a program we have traditionally used on presidentially declared disasters. Right now, we are currently in the incident period. The incident period for the COVID-19 pandemic has not ended yet with FEMA, so we are still actively involved in that and working on submitting our applications for funding. Traditionally, it's a 75% federal share, 25% local share. There is a little twist to that with the Corona Relief Fund funding coming up, and we'll talk about that in a second. The second is under HUD, it's CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, COVID, and right now their funds have been received approximately $957,000. However, we are awaiting on the Federal Register, which is the instruction manual of how the money is to be spent, how it's to be reported, to be released by HUD so that we can go ahead and utilize those funds for pandemic relief. The next is under the Health and Human Services, which is a provider relief fund. Right now, our EMS department has received around $350,000 to assist them. They do have the opportunity to apply for additional funding for COVID direct related activities with the EMS. The fourth is under the Department of Justice, and that's the criminal enforcement or crime enforcement relief fund. And the Sheriff's Department, has already received around $485,000, $486,000. That is to be used mostly for PPE, personal protective equipment over time. What we're working on right now is our 5th channel, and that's the coronavirus relief fund, and that is actually through the Treasury. Now, all the other previous 4 funds go directly from the federal government to the recipients. With the coronavirus relief fund, it actually goes through the state of South Carolina prior to going through the sub-recipients, which Richland County would be a sub-recipient. The CARES Act under the CRF, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, provided $1,996 million to the state of South Carolina to be used for corona relief efforts. Now, if you read the federal Q&A that comes out, the funds are supposed to be allocated to local county governments on a population base. For example, any local government that has population base over $500,000 received a direct allocation. In South Carolina, that only local government base was Greenville. And they did receive, I believe it was around $93 million direct. So using that formula that the federal government provided, we anticipated that we projected we were receiving around, Richland County would be receiving around $77 million. However, the state has changed that, and what they have done on June 25th, the General Assembly enacted a joint resolution, Act 142, which authorizes the initial expenditures of $1.3 billion of the $1.9 billion, almost $2 billion, to corona relief efforts. Now, they're considering what we are at right now is in phase one, and phase one will reimburse, instead of giving us an allocation of funds, they're going to reimburse expenses from the time period of March 1st to June 30th. And we have to be able to demonstrate that these expenses were necessary to prevent, prepare, and or respond to the coronavirus pandemic. Just a second, let me forward my notes here. And there's six areas that they'll provide reimbursement for, and that is medical expenses, public health expenses, payroll expenses, compliance expenses, economic expenses, and other COVID-19 related expenses. And what's really important is the criteria that must be met for the reimbursement, and that is the necessary expenditures incurred due to a public health emergency with respect to coronavirus have to show they were not accounted for in the budget most recently enacted as of March 27, 2020, and that they were incurred at the time, a period of what they call phase one, which is March 1st through June 30th. Now, some of the obvious concerns that we're seeing right now is they actually have that $1.9 billion, which the initial phase one is $1.3 billion. Only $270 million will be allocated to local government of that amount. And that's for all counties in South Carolina, but also any state agency that wants to apply and compete for that $270 million. So those funds are drastically reduced. They're incredibly competitive. And the thing is we're looking at again, Greenville. Greenville ended up, again, I thought it was around 93, but I believe it's about $91.3 million as far as a direct allocation that they could use to see how they spend or could use best use. And again, they have to account for the money, but again, it's an allocation up front. We're looking at reimbursement. One of the biggest concerns we have is the small business assistance program that Richland County has initiated. The problem is if it's a reimbursement program, there's no way that we can see where Richland County could put up the millions of dollars necessary for full small business economic return to our county and expect it to be reimbursed. Again, there's no guarantees. Right now, we're looking at phase one, which is March 1st through June 30th. They're saying phase two is from July 1st to December 30th, but they're very, very clear. There is no guarantee that phase two will be enacted. It depends on the funds that are available. So that's where we're at right now. Again, we're working all 5 of those channels. We're very focused on the CRF because they also put a deadline on us to have all this data submitted by August 15th. So counting this week, we have 3 weeks to get all this data, which is all the expenditures, proof of payment, and any other documentation such as we can tie it directly to COVID-19 to be submitted by August 15th. So it's an incredibly tight timeline. We are working diligently. We have met with all the department heads. We've met with all the key personnel. Everybody's working as a team to get this data together. But it's a significant impact on us, negative impact, that when we anticipated up to $77 million being allocated to Richland County, that we're now competing for $270 million with every other county and every other local government county and also state agencies. So that's where we're at. We're on target for August 15th. And any questions you may have, I'd be glad to answer.
Mr. Chair.
Any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Before you open it up to the committee, please, sir. Mr. King touched on it, and the reason that I thought it was important to bring this before the coronavirus ad hoc committee is specifically because the allocation versus the reimbursement process. So as he already articulated, it's important to know that instead of having funds provided by the federal government to Richland County from the state to respond to COVID-19, we would now have to be in a process where we'd have to have funds on hand to spend in addition to the funds that we were already going to be accounting for through our normal budget course to provide resources to navigate COVID-19. And so that's a very different conversation than spending funds that we receive specifically to address these issues. So I thought it was important to make sure that I brought that up to the council, and specifically the ask from me as the administrator is, what conversations can we have with those folks at the state level to reconsider apportioning those out by population and allocation versus reimbursement. So with that being said, Mr. Chair, I'll mute myself, sir.
Just one quick question to Mr. Brown. So what that really means is that we're not even sure we'll get reimbursed for what we spend for our expenditures.
That's correct. There were several conversations because as you have seen, there's deadlines by which money would have had to be spent, receipts would have to be turned in, and inventories would have to be accounted for, and the state would have to approve all of those things. So there were multiple counties on those calls that raised questions about how could they be reimbursed because they did not fall within the criteria, which was not pre-established criteria, but was criteria given during those meetings.
Thank you. Let me see if my colleagues have any questions.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Ms. Myers, you recognize.
So, and this is for Tetra Tech. How did Greenville get a direct allocation? I noted that in the materials and you repeated it today. How did Greenville get a direct allocation, essentially stepping ahead of every other county in the state and being essentially entitled to money up front rather than this process that y'all are describing? Do we know how that happened?
Population? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you hear me? Oh, Mike, you got it?
Go ahead.
I can hear you.
Go ahead, Pat. I thought you were still having audio problem.
No. What happened was a federal law gave direct allocation straight from Treasury, bypassing the state for any jurisdiction that had over 500,000 people in that jurisdiction. So the law itself gave Greenville $91.3 million. Then what was supposed to happen is the remaining $1.9 billion to the state, the federal government or the state was supposed to take 45% of that money and distribute it by population. The state didn't do that. And the reason for that, according to the federal government, was for an equitable share. They did not do that. So instead, we aren't getting what should have been roughly $77 million. The state is going to basically take control of the remaining $1.9 billion and determine what is an equitable distribution amongst all the counties and state agencies.
Follow-up question, please. How does the statute read that tells who gets what amounts of money? Does the statute say that it's based on population and that the state should apportion it that way?
The law itself says it's 50,000 people or more, and then they had it broken out how much they would get, and then how much the state would get for the remainder of their population. And then that slide in there is a direct quote FAQ that came from the Treasury Department that was dated June 24th, 2020. And that's a direct quote out of there of how the state or the federal government wanted the state to distribute that equitably across counties. And that still left the state with 55%, which is $1 billion for the state to allocate as they see fit. What we saw, what surprised us, this all came out in the last 7 days. The state decided they would allocate the remaining $1.9 billion, and there would be no direct pass-through. That would be 100% reimbursement on it. So the question I have is, did they get permission from the federal government to do this?
Right, and that's sort of where I'm going. Have you all checked with our legal department to see what their thoughts are on that? Because it seems to me that much like what the Department of Education is saying to the state, I'm not sure that this is something the state, has the authority to do. And it may be that the other counties need to band together and go to court like the Department of Education did. I mean, this is real money.
Let me just follow.
Okay, I will, sir.
Ms. Myers, can I just follow real quick so I won't forget on something you're saying?
Of course.
Yeah,
Of course.
as Ms. Myers saying too, for example, where's the Association of Counties on this?
Mr. Livingston, I have not heard anything, and I've asked a couple of questions. I was on the phone with some administrators trying to find out why I had not heard any feedback or seen any movement on this conversation, but I just haven't heard anything from any other counties at this point. Doesn't mean that they're not having the same questions, but I have not heard any discussions. But that did not change my need to bring this before you as a committee and before you as a members of council.
So, okay, I will reserve my questions until other people.
You should have the floor, Ms. Myers.
Okay, so in this context, it seems to me that this is an issue that we need resolved up front. We need to see if there are other states where, applying the same legislation, they're doing what our governor is doing. And if so, if not, is it even legal? And maybe we need to, as a preliminary matter, figure out a way of dealing with this. Mr. Brown, I respect and appreciate exactly what you're saying in that you gotta have some clarity from us on how we deal with this. Because now that we're not gonna get, at least immediately, a direct allocation, what's happening is you're saying, well, where am I gonna get whatever money it is you all are gonna tell me to spend? I hear you and I understand it. But I also think that we really do have to deal with the legal question. And I really think that we need our lawyers on this and guidance from our lobbyists on this before we can, and you're right, Mr. Livingston, the Association of Counties, this is not something that I think this council ought to move off of quickly. I think this is the prime issue, because if the statute says we're entitled to, X amount of dollars, then we have to fight for those dollars because our citizens need it. We're in a pandemic. We don't have any money tree to get money off of. And if the governor doesn't have this authority, we need to be standing up and saying that real quick, I think. I'm done, Mr. Livingston. I'll save my other questions because they're more technical, in case others have other questions about this issue.
Have any questions about other council members?
Mr. Livingston, I'm just joining you all back.
Okay. We're just fielding questions regarding the presentation, regarding the fund requirements that the state has hold of now.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Newton?
Yes, this is Chakisse Newton. Thank you for recognizing me. First, let me say that I completely concur with Councilwoman Myers, and those were some of my same questions as well as to whether or not this was a legal action and how we are going to pursue the answer to that question. But apart from that, I guess, thank you for providing the PowerPoint overview. In that PowerPoint overview, as you outlined, there were many different streams of revenue that we were looking at as we were trying to deal with the COVID crisis. And I just want to make sure it is, of those streams of possible revenues and reimbursements, is this one the only one that you're concerned about? Or as you look at, other funds that we were hoping for and or planning on, or do you have other concerns about those other buckets as well, if that question makes sense?
It does make sense. Mr. Brown, do you want me to go ahead and answer?
Yes, you can. Let me give the short answer, Pat, and you give the more technical answer. So it is not the only bucket that we're looking at. We are looking at these other buckets. Some of them have tie-ins that are different than this bucket would have that would have made this bucket easier to use and utilize, where to the other buckets have some tie-in. So Pat, if you pick up from there, please, sir.
I will.
Hey, can I ask a follow-up question that Mr. Beekman may also be able to answer as part of his answer? Hearing your answer Mr. Brown about these funds having potentially been easier to use if we had received them as anticipated. If you could give the answer and then maybe say, give some examples of some of the kinds of things that we had hoped to do with these funds that now we might have to pause or adapt.
Okay, so I will answer that question, then I'll turn it over to Pat if you don't have any follow-up. So specifically, I had talked to our group about 3 primary utilizations. One was protective equipment. So personal protective equipment, I think that's, you know, a pretty obvious one for the general public as well as for staff who are responding. The other bucket was technology related. So infrastructure and resources to allow the county to provide the ability for citizens to access the county services more easily, and to allow county employees to perform their services in a remote environment. And then the third area that we talked about, so we had the telework for the community and for the employees. We had the personal protective equipment for all the related individuals, the community, and again, the workers. And then a third bucket, I don't know why it's slipping my mind right now, but those were some of the examples. And I'll think of that third bucket, but it was 3 big buckets that I had in mind that now we would have to try to find funding somewhere else in order to do those same things. So Pat, if you would pick up, and then I'll think of that third bucket, Ms. Newton, and I'll follow up with that example.
Just
Okay.
a follow up with Mr. Brown before we switch to Pat. I'm sorry, Pat, do you mind?
No, go ahead,
Failure.
please.
Okay, Mr. Brown, what is the price tag? What's the number that you had on those buckets?
Wow, I mean, we have those allocations out. I'll have to get those. I'm sorry, Ms. Mike. We had a whole breakdown, but you're talking about millions of dollars. I have to be.
No, I know. I just want to know how many. I know
How many millions, huh?
We had a survey.
Okay. I know it's many millions.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. While we're in the backdrop, maybe Mr. King, if you could see if you can grab that survey and just kind of give those breakdowns that we anticipated for the expenditure of those funds, if you could, while we're having Pat address the previous question.
Yes, sir. I'll look that up. And one thing, and I know Pat will probably talk about this, and Mr. Brown, I know we talked about this, is, and I believe Director Voignier is on the line, is the impact to our small business in Richland County, and especially being forced to close. I know a lot of discussion was utilizing this money, this allocation, to help our small business with grants to get them back on their feet. So that's going to be devastating. And depending on which study you look at, that could be anywhere from $40 to $50 million in impact right there. I'll see if I can find that survey, and I'll be right back with you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, quickly to answer the question, are there any other concerns with any of the other 5 funding streams? Yes, the CDBG CV funding stream that we've received almost $1 million on, we are still waiting on HUD to release the Federal Register. The Federal Register tells us what's allowable, what's not allowable, and the implementing instructions on how we can spend that money. So obviously, until we get those instructions, we know we've got a dollar amount, we just don't know how to spend it. I hate to say it, but it's traditional of HUD to tell you how much money you're going to get, and then it takes them forever to allow you to spend it because they haven't come out with the instructions. So that piece we're waiting on. But as I lost track of who said this, but the CRF funding stream was going to be our most flexible funding stream until the state came up with this new implementing instructions, because we would get the money first, and then Richland County could decide how to disperse the funds, whether it is deep cleaning of our office spaces, whether it is PPE, whether it is small business. The choice is ours. Unfortunately, that the state has only given us basically $270 million that we have to compete with all the other counties and the state itself and the state's the decider of who gets that $270 million. Clearly, in my opinion, that they are violating that equitability standard, that the federal government wanted these funds equitably distributed amongst counties based off of population. And given how they split up that initial 1.3 billion, I can't see how the state can ensure equitability by population across each jurisdiction.
And Ms. Newton, Pat actually mentioned it when he mentioned the other area is, as you can imagine, our cleaning supplies, materials related to COVID-19 response is something that is ongoing and is a huge deal. So that was the third area actually that we were looking at shoring up, because we get those calls on a daily basis. And as you can imagine, it's very important people being aware that their areas are thoroughly cleaned and repetitively cleaned multiple times and with the appropriate products. So as you can, those are three big ticket items that we were looking to spend funds for, separate and apart from any relief opportunities that the council provided.
Ms. McBride, you
Thank
recognize.
you.
Yes, I missed the entire presentation, and I'm not going to ask you to go back through it. I just heard the last part. Actually, I only heard Ms. Myers talking, which sort of enlightened me a little bit to what was going on. So does that mean that at this time, Richland County gets no funds from that particular, what's that, CRF funding?
No, ma'am. I would just, short answer is that's not what that means.
Uh-huh.
Necessarily, we have to submit all of our documentation and our inventory and paid receipts by deadlines. And if the state approves of those, then we could receive reimbursement.
Okay.
And that we have to be approved.
Okay.
But Ms. McBride, I think most important though is it appears to be a significant reduction in the pool of funds. That's what we're really concerned about.
It's
the
what
government choosing to distribute the funds.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you, Mr. Livingston.
It looked like there could be less funds than we anticipated because of the way the governor is going to distribute the funds.
Okay. And I agree with, based on that, what Ms. Myers was saying, it appears to be illegal. And so we're going to have our legal counsel to look into that, as well as looking at what other counties are doing, my understanding. The last question, somewhat related, was testing included in any of those provisions, or were you thinking about doing any testing, needing resources for that?
Yes, ma'am. The answer to your question is yes. Though the testing, however, is also included. But again, now we're talking about reimbursements versus upfront.
I understand that part, but we were trying to look at if we got funding.
Yes, ma'am. If we have funding, testing would be included in those funds that we would expect to spend. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Livingston.
Thank you. I would just strongly suggest that we move forward. When this come before us in our regular council special call meeting, we just need to instruct our legal and staff to just pursue this matter from a legal perspective and make sure the law is whether or not the law is allowing the governor to do what he's attempting to do. We just need to and get Association of County those involved in the process.
Mr. Chair, would a motion be in order at this point on this issue?
Yes.
Okay, so I move that the committee forward to council a recommendation that the staff and Tetra Tech work with our legal department, the Association of Counties, and any of our lobbyists who might be relevant in this question to ascertain first whether or not what the governor has proposed with these funds is consistent with the federal statute and what actions we should take to protect the interests of the citizens of Richland County receiving a fair proportionate share of the funds allocated by the federal government.
Thank you. And I'll sure second that.
I second, okay.
A discussion? Reference that motion? If not, Ms. Only, can you call the roll for that motion, just.
Yes, sir. McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker, Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you.
Mr. Livingston.
Yes, Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir. I apologize. I was trying to get my phone unmuted. In regard to the motion that was just made and passed by the committee, I guess my question is, since this is the last meeting of the council, when you have the special call meeting later on today, does the motion include not only looking into it, but going forward with any action that we think we need to take should we find that we think that we need to take some action to protect the citizens of Richland County, I guess is my question. Because you all wouldn't be back in session until the end of August.
I'd be willing to make a second
Yeah,
motion
I'm
or to
fine with
amend
that
my
too.
motion to include that.
Okay.
So as the
I just
maker
wanted to-
of the motion, I would amend the motion to include the legal department's recommending and taking action consistent with protecting the interest of the citizens of Richland County in accessing a proportionate and fair share of the federal funds under the CARES Act.
As a second of that motion, I'm fine with that too.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
And it will have to be
You're
made
welcome.
to full council anyway. Mr. Brown, I think that helps us in terms of where we need to go with item, that first item.
Yes, sir.
Ready to move to the second item?
We are, and this won't take very long. I wanted to, again, as a part of this process, just communicate to the committee and ultimately to the council what's been going on. So what's in your packet, pages 44 through 62, we won't cover that, but what I wanted to do was, if you noticed in the packet, there was an amendment that was received, and that amendment came by way of, I sent the agreement that you're looking at to various members of the staff as well as county attorney. And I asked for everyone to look at the information and provide me feedback on any concerns that they had about the agreement. The legal office, specifically Attorney Smith, reviewed the document, and he, along with risk management and a few others, emergency management, they noticed that there was some language within the document that did not represent what should be in the agreement. And that specifically was the hold harmless related information. And there were a few other questions. Mr. Smith reached out to the sender of the information of the agreement, shared our concerns. And a few days later, we received, and I'm thinking everybody wound up getting this, but we received this amendment. And my point of bringing it up to you was not that you need to take any action, but was just to show you that we need to be engaged in this process, because this agreement was originally sent with some language that is inappropriate to be in the agreement. Mr. Smith called it, a few others had questions about it. We asked about it. Ultimately, they sent back an amendment taking that language out. But that's why I'm just, again, coming to the body, just communicating. It's important that I'm asking that everybody be engaged, because if there can be changes made, then we want to make sure we let our voices be heard so that we can receive the benefits necessary. And this amendment to this agreement, I thought was indicative of that, because I'm not sure how many people signed the agreement with the language in it, but in order to access the portal to receive reimbursements, we had to sign this agreement. And I'll let Mr. Smith, briefly, if you would, Mr. Smith, tell the council, if we had signed that agreement with the language that was presented, what would that have meant for the body, if you don't mind, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, there was an indemnification and hold harmless language that was in the agreement. And of course, it's been longstanding South Carolina law that governmental entities cannot execute and enter into agreements with hold harmless and indemnification language in it. So this agreement basically had the county indemnifying and holding harmless the state for anything that they did related to the disbursement of these funds and their review of the process and their allocation. So I did bring it to Mr. Brown's attention. I think there's a gentleman named Brian Gaines who was the person who submitted this document to us for review. I sent him an email along with the case law that basically said, no, you can't do this. And of course, as Mr. Brown said, they sort of reversed course. So that's what it would have meant had we not at least gone back to them and said, hey, this is inappropriate as far as we know. And you all may want to take a look at this, and apparently somebody did.
Yeah, so there's no action taken that the body needs to take. As a matter of fact, now that we have this documentation, I can execute this agreement, and then they will, part of the process is the chief administrative officer has to execute the agreement. The chair of the council has to execute this agreement. Then the state will grant us access to the portal to submit items for reimbursement. And without signing this agreement, we don't even gain access to the portal. So as you can imagine, it was very important that we made sure we signed a document that we were comfortable with. So that's all I had on that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
And the only other thing that I will say that, based on the discussion, there's also language in here that basically, if the county signs this agreement, it is basically agreeing to allow the state to allocate these funds under this formula. So in other words, if our argument is that we believe that they haven't followed the CARES Act, if we sign this agreement, we basically could waive that argument because we would be agreeing to this methodology of allocation with the state.
So thank you for that, Mr. Smith. And so we need to move on to the next item, Mr. Chair, but
Wait. I'm sorry, Mr. Brown. I know we got to move quickly, but that raises a huge question that we need some guidance on. And Mr. Livingston, can I ask, am I recognized?
he's muted, Ms. Myers.
Uh-oh.
Yes, you are, Ms. Myers.
Okay, thank you. So with that, just very quickly, Mr. Smith, by our meeting tonight, could you be prepared to give us some guidance as to how we move forward and preserve our rights? Because my last question was going to be, does this, the signing that agreement impair any of our substantial or substantive legal rights, essentially to raise questions about the state acting outside of its authority with these funds? So you think you got time for somebody to give us some guidance on that tonight?
I'm not sure,
that's
Ms. Myers. We'll do the best we can. Yeah, we'll do the best we can between now and then.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Because if we don't sign it, we get zero funds. But if we sign it, we may be waiving the right to hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. So, okay, thank you.
All right.
And I would just simply point out that in order to access the possible reimbursements, we actually have to enter the information into the portal. So, that there's a time sensitivity related to the deadline and the ability to enter all of the information from all of the departments that may have related reimbursements that we would try to secure. So it is a big question, Councilmember Myers. I certainly understand where you're going. Remember, they gave us an initial deadline of 8/15. So, I mean, it's not, it's a tight timeline all around.
Mr. King, your hand up. Did you want to speak?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I just saw Mr. King's hand was up. Anything else on item B here? If not, Mr. Brown, we're ready to move forward.
Sure. The last item, a little bit easier item to deal with, members of the committee and council. You may recall, as a part of the relief grant program that the county enacted, There was some information that we put on there about timelines, but we also talked about being adaptable. Earlier on, we set a timeline from March to the end of our fiscal year. And at that time, I don't think that we thought that we would still be awarding dollars into the end of the year. But considering that we have just made some awards to grantees, we need to extend, or rather we need to actually change the information in our program to say, instead of having those funds expended by August 31st, that we need to allow them to have those funds and have them expended by October 31st. So the specific request that I'm asking is that we allow those individual organizations who have received financial relief funds from Richland County, that they are allowed to expend their funds through October 31st. And that's important because we just made some awards at the last meeting, and so it would not be equitable for those folks to have to turn around and have those funds expended and have reporting back to the council, to the county by 8/31. So I'm asking.
There's a motion in order. Oh, sorry, Mr. Brown.
Yes, that's what I was asking for a motion to the finish, yes.
That's
Okay.
it.
Yes, the motion is
So,
in order.
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt and approve the administrator's recommendation for forwarding to full council.
You've heard the motion, there's a second?
I'll second.
I'll second the motion. Any discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. McBride, you recognize?
are we sure that October 31st, if they just received the funds, would be adequate timing, given the paperwork and everything that has to be done?
Ms. McBride, I don't know if Director Hayes is on the line, but we need to have enough time to allow them to spend the funds, do their paperwork, and then also the county receive its information so that it could still have a potential opportunity to receive reimbursement. Because without that timeline, we're further pushing things back, and then we might not be able to receive, any relative reimbursements ourselves for those funds.
Well, have they received any checks yet?
Yes, ma'am. People have received checks.
But has everyone, the deadline is October the 31st, has everyone received the checks, the money?
Mr. Brown and I'm on the line if you want me to answer.
Yes, I do want you to answer, sir. Thank you.
Ms. McBride, to answer your question, of course, no, not every group has received funding. That's why I actually brought the attention to Mr. Brown with council recently over the last 2 council meetings, giving approval for many of the groups. We're still notifying the groups. One of the problems that we ran into, unfortunately, with this being a very new program, is a lot of the small businesses were having trouble turning in the proper documentation. So we felt that to give them time to make sure that they had all the proper documents to comply with the grant program, we needed to extend the deadline because I didn't see a clear.
Mr. Hayes, I understand that. I'm not talking, I agree with extending. I want to make sure that the 31st is long enough, an extension long enough for them to get the information in, given that some have not received the funds. So I agree with the extension, but I want to make sure that it doesn't need to be until November.
Again, when I was in my estimation, I think October is good, but obviously if council wants to move it to November, that's fine too, ma'am.
No, I'm just asking for your expertise on it, given that some have not received the funds.
Because we're in the process of trying to expedite these groups getting the funding in. And so that I looked at it as them having all of August, all of September, and all of October. So 3 months I thought would be adequate. But again, we're certainly open to any change by council.
So when can we ensure that they will get the funds? I think that's going to be important in terms of them submitting the paperwork back.
Well, right along with finance actually does it. We're ready to expedite processing of the payments as soon as we get proper documentation. So my staff is working with these groups to ensure that they turn in the proper documentation. So as soon as the documents are properly turned in for each group, we submit those payments to AP. So we are working very diligently with these groups so that they turn in the proper documentation.
I don't have an issue with the 31st, but if there are extenuating circumstances due to the county, then I want them to be able to be reimbursed.
Councilmember McBride, I think that one of the things that when I first started this conversation, we talked about adaptability, and we talked about that initially when the council approved this program. We remain adaptable. If in fact that becomes the case, we'll come back to you again, let you know those specific entities that may have had an issue, and we will make sure that happens, ma'am. We have
Okay, then I have no problem with the motion.
Okay, so it's moved and proper second. If there's no further discussion, let me ask Ms. Only to call the roll. Ms. Only?
Hang on one second. I got it. McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Walker, Myers,
Yes.
Newton.
Motion passes. Anything else coming before the body?
No, Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Chair, Mr. Chair,
Ms. Myers, you recognize?
this is a question that we've been raising since we established this committee, but we really do need a regularized meeting time. I really don't want us to be like the White House Coronavirus Task Force. This is getting worse, not better. And I would like us to please establish a regular meeting time.
Ms. Only, please remind me to send out a notice tomorrow, and we'll set a regular time as soon as possible.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair,
Yes, you are.
this is Chakisse Newton.
Go ahead.
2 items. One, on the item you were just talking about in terms of a regular meeting time, an email did go out to that effect several weeks ago, and I think everyone responded, but we can always do it again. But Ms. Only, if you would report my vote as yes for that last motion, I was muted on both my lines, and I don't think you recorded my vote.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And if there's nothing else, since we're about to run out of time.
One more item, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, we run on 5 o'clock meeting, but go ahead real quick.
I know. Just Mr. Smith, if for tonight, you could be prepared at a minimum to discuss with us whether or not an emergency motion would be where we need to go with this. I think that might help guide the council's discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anything else? Is the motion for adjournment?
So moved.
It's a move. Is a second?
Second.
Second.
It's moving proper second. Is there anything to call the roll for adjournment?
Yes, sir. McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Myers,
Goodbye.
Newton.
Yes.
Goodbye.
It's adjourned. Thank y'all so very, very much.